Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Historians mostly remember the Major General pictured here, Robert Huston Milroy, for a single failure. During the early part of the Gettysburg Campaign, Milroy commanded the 6,900 man garrison at Winchester, Virginia, when an entire Confederate corps, led by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell, marched on the city. It was in mid June 1863, just a couple weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg. Milroy refused to abandon his post, perhaps a noble but ultimately a futile stand. In the end, he lost the city, almost half his men, and barely escaped with his own life. The military, the War Department, government eventually exonerated him of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done to his reputation and it followed him throughout history right down to today. Even before Gettysburg, in fact, Milroy's record was, you might say, middling at best. In Western Virginia during the earliest part of the war in 1861, and then in the Shenandoah Valley during the first part of 1862, he led a brigade and, in fairness, showed some aggression, some real aggression and tenacity. But the results in the battles of McDowell and Cross Keys were not especially memorable for him. About this time, the summer of 1862, a commentary in the Detroit Free Press described him in a little less than complimentary terms. Let me read it to you. Here's how it goes. General Milroy is a man often mentioned in General John C. Fremont's department. That was a West Virginia area. He, Milroy, is an odd specimen of an American. Standing about 6 feet 4 inches high, he towers above his men with commanding physical force. His face is square, with a reddish gray beard covering, but not hiding, a small mouth of singular directness and decision. He speaks hesitatingly and is evidently not a large nor quick thinker, also possessed of a nervous sensibility and a sensation of fear which manifests itself. So there you have the Detroit Free Press describing Milroy. Sounds good in the beginning, tall, the white hair, the red beard, the square face, but then some peculiar characteristics in this tall man. However, in fairness, it can be said that Milroy had been a good citizen before the war and approached life and being an American with generally good intentions. He was born in Indiana in 1816, educated at Norwich Military Academy in Vermont, served as a captain during the Mexican War but saw no combat, and afterwards earned a degree at the Indiana University Law School and became an attorney and a judge. Good going. After the election of Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860, he showed his patriotism and concern about the very real possibility of war by setting aside his career and organizing a militia company. And then, after Fort Sumter and the beginning of the war, he became colonel of the 9th Indiana Infantry and soon advanced to general. One aspect of Milroy's character that has been overshadowed is his zeal for the plight of enslaved people. An anecdote relayed by a colonel, Joseph Warren Kiefer, reveals how, on the frigid and snowy morning of January 1st, 1863, along a slope of the Allegheny Mountains, Milroy rode among his troops in the snow to remind them of a momentous event unfolding, that issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Milroy believed it was about to change everything and said as much to Kiefer, who, as you'll learn, was caught off guard and initially confused, alarmed by Milroy's animated behavior. Kiefer believed that he was trying to be told by Milroy that the force was somehow under attack, but in fact, it was only Milroy spreading the word of Emancipation Day. So let me read this passage from Kiefer's recollections of the Civil War as he talks about Milroy and Emancipation Day, 1863. So Here's how Kiefer begins. On the night of December 31st, 1862, the command bivouacked on the western slope of the Allegheny Mountains in a fierce snowstorm, and early the next morning, my troops led the way in the continuing storm over the summit. Shortly after, the head of the column commenced the eastern descent, and when the chilling winter blasts had caused the lowest ebb of human enthusiasm to be reached, shouts were heard by me at first indistinctly, then nearer and louder. This was so unusual and unexpected under the depressing circumstances that I ordered the column to halt until I could go back and ascertain the cause. My first impression was that a sudden attack had been made on the rear of the troops. But as the shouts came near, I took them to be for a great victory, news of which had just arrived. When I reached the crest of the mountain, I descried through the flying snow General Milroy riding along the line of troops and halting at intervals as though to briefly address the men. I awaited his approach and, on his arrival, accosted him with the inquiry, "What's the matter, General?" He had his hat and his sword in his right hand, and with the other guided his horse at a reckless gallop through the snow, his tall form, shocky white hair fluttering in the storm, and evident agitation making a figure most picturesque and striking. He pulled up his horse abruptly to answer my question, a natural impediment in his speech, affecting him most when excited, caused some delay in his first vehement utterance. He said, "Colonel, don't you know that this is Emancipation Day when all slaves will be made free?" He then turned to the halted troops and again broke forth. "This day, President Lincoln will proclaim the freedom of 4 millions of human slaves, the most important event in the history of the world since Christ was born. Our boast that this is a land of liberty has been a flaunting lie. Henceforth, it will be a veritable reality. The defeats of our armies in the past we have deserved because we waged a war to protect and perpetuate and to rivet firmer the chains of slavery. Hereafter, we shall prosecute the war to establish and perpetuate liberty for all mankind beneath the flag, and the Lord God Almighty will fight on our side, and he is a host, and the Union armies will triumph." So there you have the words of the 6'4" tall Major General Robert Milroy in a snowstorm in the crest of the Allegheny Mountains on Emancipation Day, January 1st, 1863, telling the men of the joy and the change and the victory that was sure to come now that Abraham Lincoln has freed 4 million slaves. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.